Welcome to Mindshock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. We are finally taking a look at the missing 411 phenomena. This has been one of the most requested topics, possibly because it intersects thousands of missing persons cases, possibly because some people believe that there is clearly something supernatural or interdimensional at work. Others believe it's Bigfoot. Others still believe it's the U.S. government and or aliens in cahoots, kidnapping people who visit large parks, national parks, or other wilderness areas. And others still maintain it could simply be undiscovered serial killers, far more than thought, operating in areas. Now, what I am going to do is what I always do. In typical Mindshock fashion, examine the topic in exhaustive fashion, looking at all possibilities, all theories, and attempting not to fall for logical fallacies like false dichotomies, or false trichotomies, or false quadratides, or quintagonies. Because it's kind of impossible to really group everything together. There could be more than one phenomena at play, and based on the sheer number of cases, not just phenomena, but natural explanations as well, there's got to be a lot of different things at play, just the sheer diversity of locations. Now, there are, of course, clusters. David Paulides has indeed done a lot of research, and we'll be getting into all aspects of this. There are clusters, and there's certainly possibilities that there could be one prevailing theory, but there could also be many theories at work, and more than one are true. Is it also possible that this entire thing is some mass psyop? That idea does not get a lot of discussion, but I will be going into that as well. And I will also be delving into urban 411 and these strange disappearances, even not in the wilderness, but in actual civilization, even in busy cities. I mean, this is a vast topic that has been getting more and more attention in recent years. And it does need an all-encompassing logical examination, which is, of course, what Mindshock is for and why all the Mindshock listeners are here. If you enjoy the podcast, find it interesting, want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Mindshock. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through so you get notified for all the latest mind-shocking episodes. Like and share this podcast. Let's spread logic and reason to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So, just for those that are new to the topic, and you know nothing about missing 411, I found a very interesting article. It is on outsideonline.com, and I found it relatively well balanced. This is by John Billman, published March 13th, 2017, Search and Rescue. How 1,600 people went missing from our public lands without a trace. When 18-year-old Joe Keller vanished from a dude ranch in Colorado's Rio Grande National Forest, he joined the ranks of those missing on public land. No official tally exists, but their numbers are growing. And when an initial search turns up nothing, who'll keep looking? And I'm just going to interject real quick for what actually piqued my interest in this so-called phenomena. Why is the National Park Service, the FBI, other government agencies, why are they keeping all these records secret regarding these missing persons? See, that's what leads critical thinking conspiracy theorists to believe that there's something strange going on. Even if it's not paranormal, even if it's not interdimensional Bigfoot or aliens, there's something that clearly warrants being hidden, or charging obscene amount of money, like thousands and thousands of dollars for documents. I mean, it's a little strange, almost like intentionally just putting these prices so high, and then most of it's redacted anyway, or they just say it comes up missing. So it's just really, really curious, because the truth is, of course, not afraid of investigation. Continuing the article here, July 23rd, 2015 was the eve of Joseph Lloyd Keller's 19th birthday. The Cleveland, Tennessee native had been spending the summer between his freshman and sophomore years at Cleveland State Community College on a western road trip with buddies Colin Gwaltney and Christian Fetzner in Gwaltney's old Subaru. The boys had seen Las Vegas, San Francisco, and the Grand Canyon before heading to Joe's aunt and uncle's dude ranch, the Rainbow Trout Ranch, in the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado. The ranch is in Conejos County, which is bigger than Rhode Island, with 8,000 residents and no stoplights. Sheep graze in the sunshine, potatoes and barley are grown here and trucked north to Denver. 3 new marijuana dispensaries in the tiny town of Antonito lure New Mexicans across the nearby state line. Conejos, Spanish for rabbits, is one of the poorest counties in Colorado. It's also a hell of a place to get lost. With its eastern plains stretch across the agricultural San Luis Valley, its western third rises into the 1.8 million acre Rio Grande National Forest, which sprawls over parts of 9 counties. Go missing out here, and your fate relies in no small part on which of those 9 counties you were in when you disappeared. Joe, a competitive runner, open water swimmer, an obstacle course racer, and Colin, a member of the varsity cross-country team at Division I Tennessee Tech, had been running together often during their trip. Neither was totally acclimatized to the altitude. The ranch sits just below 9,000 feet. Joe was a bit slower than his friend. He suffered from asthma as a 3-year-old, but had kicked it by the age of 12. The workout would be routine, an hour-long run, likely along Forest Road 250, which bisects the ranch and continues into the National Forest, following the Conejos River upstream. Joe left his phone and wallet at the ranch house. He wore only red running shorts, blue trail shoes, and an Iron Man watch. Shirtless, with blonde anime hair and ripped muscles, he looked more like a California lifeguard than a Tennessee farm kid. 4:30 p.m. The friends started out together. Neither runner knew the area, but old-timers will tell you that even a blind man could find his way out of Conejos Canyon. On the south side, runners left. Cattle graze in open meadows along the river. On the north side, Ponderosa Pine's birthday candle the steep, tough, until they hit sheer basalt cliffs. A massive canyon wall rising 2,000 feet above the gravel road towards 11,210-foot Black Mountain. That sounds ominous. As the 2 young men jogged by the corral, one of the female wranglers yelled, "Pick it up." They smiled, and Joe sprinted up the road before the 2 settled into their respective paces, with Colin surging ahead. The GPS track on Colin's watch shows him turning right off Forest Road 250 onto the ranch drive and snaking up behind the lodge, trying to check out 3 geologic outcroppings, Faith, Hope, and Charity, that loom over the ranch. But the run became a scramble, so he cut back down toward the road and headed upriver. A fly fisherman says he saw Colin 2.5 miles up the road, but not Joe. Colin never encountered his friend. He timed out his run at a pace that led to puking due to the altitude. No Joe. Colin moseyed back to the ranch house and waited. An hour later, he started to worry. When Joe didn't show up to get ready for dinner, Colin and Christian drove up the road honking and waiting for Joe to come limping toward the road like a lost steer. At 7:30, a small patrol of ranch hands hiked up the rocks towards Faith, the closest formation. By 9:30, there were 35 people out looking. If he was hurt, he would have heard us, recalled Joe's uncle, David Van Burkham, 47. He was either not conscious or not there. The first 24 hours are key, says Robert Coaster, a.k.a. Professor Rescue, author of the search and rescue guidebook, Lost Person Behavior. Coaster was consulted on the Keller case and noted that, like most missing runners, Joe wasn't dressed for a night outside. Plus, he says, it wouldn't have been unusual for a young athlete like Joe to switch from run to scramble mode. Heading for higher ground is a known strategy for a lost person, he says. Maybe you can get a better vista, and based on his age, it might have been a fun thing to do. Around 10 p.m., the Van Berkums called the Conejos County Sheriff's Department, and Sheriff Howard Galvez and 2 deputies showed up around midnight. It was now Joe's birthday. At this point, the effort was still what pros call a hasty search, quick and dirty, focusing on the most logical areas. It was a warm night, and everyone still expected Joe to find his way back at daybreak, wild story in tow. That morning, as ranch employees and guests continued the search, Jane Van Berkom, 48, alerted Joe's parents, Zoe, 56, and Neil, 59. Zoe and Jane are sisters, originally from Kenya. Their family, British expats, left the country in the 70s. It took the Kellers and their 17-year-old daughter, Hannah, less than 24 hours to get to the ranch from Tennessee, flying into Albuquerque, New Mexico, and renting a car for the 3.5-hour drive north. The family arrived at 2 a.m. in the morning. At 6 a.m., the professional search began, arriving at what searchers call the point last seen, the ranch's big Ponderosa Pine Gate. A deputy fire chief from La Plata County named Roy Vreeland, 64, and his Belgian Malinois scent dog, Cayenne, picked up a direction of travel which pointed up Forest Road 250. More dogs arrived from Albuquerque and identified different directions of travel or none at all. Additional firefighters drove over from La Plata County. Everyone on the ground, as is largely the case with search and rescue, were volunteers. There was nothing to go on. In that first week, the search engaged about 15 dogs and 200 people on foot, horseback, and ATV. An infrared-equipped airplane from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control flew over the area. Colin's brother Tanner set up a GoFundMe site that paid for a helicopter to search for 5 hours, and a volunteer flew his fixed-wing aircraft in the canyon multiple times. A guy with a drone buzzed the steep embankments along Highway 17, the closest paved road, and the rock formation Faith, which has a cross on top. A $10,000 reward was posted for information. How far could a shirtless kid in running shoes get? But after several days, volunteers began going home, pulled by other obligations. The few who remained did interviews, followed up on leads, and worked teams and dogs. But the search was already winding down. We had a very limited number of people, one volunteer told me. That's fairly typical in Colorado. You put out calls and people say, well, if he hasn't been found in that time, I have to go to work. The absence of clues left a vacuum that quickly filled with anger, resentment, false hopes, and conspiracy theories. A tourist with a time-stamped receipt from a little gift shop in nearby Horka swore she saw 2 men on the road, but later changed her story. A psychic reached out on Facebook to report a vision that Joe was west of Sedona, Arizona. There was even a theory that he'd been kidnapped in order to have his organs harvested and sold on the black market. We feel like he's not in that area. He's been taken from there, Neil Keller would tell me months later. I'm a scientist, Coaster says. I'm fond of Occam's razor. That's the principle that the simplest explanation usually holds true. You could have a band of terrorists tied to a tree and interrogate him. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. And again, it's amazing how many so-called scientists don't understand Occam's razor. Occam's razor does not state that the simplest explanation is usually true. It states when 2 explanations equally explain something, the simpler one should be used because it is more likely to be correct. Not always correct. This remnant of medieval science, not always correct. Of course, there are exceptions, and how would you know whether something is an exception? But it doesn't even need to get there. Because are there 2 equally adequate explanations, in which case you would use the one with fewer assumptions? But based on the actual evidence, not based on hallucinations. And if there is no evidence, then you can't even apply Occam's razor. Like, you can't even get to the point where you would apply it. That's something a lot of so-called scientists always miss. I talk about that on the podcast all the time, but for some reason, there's just so many goofs who just do not understand Occam's razor. Joe Keller had just joined the foggy stratum of the hundreds or maybe thousands of people who've gone missing on our federal public lands. Thing is, nobody knows how many. The National Institute of Justice, the research arm of the Department of Justice, calls unidentified remains and missing persons the nation's silent mass disaster, estimating that on any given day there are between 80,000 and 90,000 people actively listed with law enforcement as missing. The majority of those, of course, disappear in populated areas. What I wanted to know was how many people are missing in our wild places, the roughly 640 million acres of federal lands, including national parks, national forests, and the Bureau of Land Management property. Cases like 51-year-old Dale Stelling, who in 2013 vanished from a short petroglyph viewing trail near the gift shop at Colorado's Mesa Verde National Park. Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old rafting guide who was wearing a professional-grade flotation device when he disappeared in 2015 in Grand Canyon National Park during a hike after setting up camp. Ohioan Chris Fowler, who vanished from the Pacific Crest Trail last fall. At least 2 people have recently gone missing outside the national forest where I live, in Upper Pennsylvania of Michigan. There are scores more stories like this. The Department of the Interior knows how many wolves and grizzly bears roam its wilds. Can't it keep track of visitors who disappear? That's an excellent question. How do the authority-worshipping cultists and the coincidence theorists defend that one? But the government does not actively aggregate such statistics. The Department of Justice keeps a database, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, but reporting missing persons is voluntary in all but 10 states, and law enforcement and coroner participation is voluntary as well. So a lot of the missing are also missing from the database. After the September 11th attacks, Interior tried to build its own database to track law enforcement actions across lands managed by the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. The result, the Incident Management Analysis and Reporting System, is a $50 million database to nowhere. Last year, only 14% of the several hundred reported incidents were entered into it. The system is so flawed that Fish and Wildlife has said no thanks and refuses to use it. That leaves the only estimates to civilians and conspiracy theorists. Aficionados of the vanished believe that at least 1,600, and perhaps many times that number, remain missing on public lands under circumstances that defy easy explanation. Numbers aside, it matters tremendously where you happen to disappear. If you vanish in a municipality, the local police department is likely to look for you. The police can obtain assistance from the county sheriff, or in other cases, state police or university law enforcement. If foul play is suspected, your state's Bureau of Investigation can decide to get involved. Atop that is the FBI. With the exception of the sheriff, however, these organizations don't tend to go rifling through the woods unless your case turns into a criminal one. And that's kind of weird too. Like, they don't care about helping to find somebody only if somebody harmed them. Like, someone's life and loved ones are only valuable if there's a crime. I mean, that's kind of weird also. But all those bets are off when you disappear in the wild. While big national parks like Yosemite operate almost as sovereign states with their own crack search and rescue teams, go missing in most western states, and with the exception of New Mexico and Alaska, statutes that date back to the Old West stipulate that you're now the responsibility of the county sheriff. There are no federal standards for terrestrial search and rescue, Coaster says. Very few states have standards. A missing person is a local problem. It's a historical institution from when the sheriff was the only organized government. And when it comes to the locals riding to your rescue, Coaster says, there's a vast spectrum of capability. Take Rio Grande National Forest. It has just one full-time law enforcement officer who wasn't given clearance to talk to Outside magazine. I mean, how crazy is that too? He needs to get clearance to talk to a magazine. Wow. Just the one random guy at a national forest. I mean, does that not tell you something weird's going on? Ranger Andrea Jones of the 377,314 acre Conejos Peak district, where Joe disappeared, did lament to me that sometimes she discovers cases in the weekly newspaper. On occasions, when we initially learn about a search and rescue in the forest from the local media, she explains, it's difficult for us to properly engage, communicate, and offer available knowledge or resources. But wherever you are, once the search goes from rescue to recovery, most of those resources dry up. On August 4th, 2015, after Joe had been missing for 13 days, Sheriff Galvez pulled the plug on the official search. What had begun as a barnyard musical was now a ghost story. The river, already dropping quickly, had been searched and ruled out. Dog teams had scratched up nothing. Abandoned cabins had been searched and searched again. I mean, we checked the pit toilets at the campgrounds. We did everything, Galvez said. We even collected bear crap. We still have it in the evidence freezer. Wow, this is pretty thorough. To all the goofs that just dismiss these cases as simply somebody wandered off and died, I mean, this sounds pretty thorough. They have all the bear crap in evidence to see if the bear ate them. I mean, that's crazy. Galvez had been elected sheriff only 9 months earlier, and while he had years of law enforcement experience, he had no background leading search and rescue operations. One responder told me that by the time he arrived on the second day of searching, tension was already rising between Keller and Sheriff Galvez. Keller felt that Galvez wasn't doing enough. Galvez felt that Keller was in the way, barking orders and criticizing his crew. When dogs and volunteers start to go back to their lives and the aircraft return to the hangar, a missing person search can look eerily quiet. For a lost person, the response is limited to 5 days on average, Keller told me. There needs to be a plan for applying resources for a little bit longer. 5 days, somebody could survive for longer than 5 days, especially if they have possibly some water or something. The Keller family hired 2 private investigators who turned up nothing. Zoe Keller told me it was a waste of $800 a day. One of the investigators told me he'd never had a case with less to go on. Wow. So there's literally nothing. This guy vanished into thin air. The reward was raised from $10,000 to $25,000, then to $50,000. But as David Van Berkom said, there just isn't a sniff of anything. So there were no cars on the road. I mean, this is the middle of nowhere. I mean, this is truly a bizarre case. 2 weeks after Joe's cold vanish, Alamosa County Undersheriff Sean Woods, who had been called in to assist by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, told Keller about a tracker he knew named Alan Duffy. A 71-year-old surgical assistant, Duffy became interested in bloodhounds when his 21-year-old brother, David, disappeared in the San Gabriel Mountains in 1978. He was found dead of a gunshot wound 6 weeks later. Duffy had since taken his dogs to search JonBenet Ramsey's neighborhood and track stolen horses in Wyoming. Calling in Duffy was a wild card, as are so many things in a case like this. On August 15, Duffy loaded 3-year-old R.C., named after Royal Crown Cola, on account of his black and tan coat, into his Jeep and drove 300 miles from Broomfield, Colorado to the Rainbow Trout Ranch. A deputy gave him a scent item and one of Joe's used sock liners. This is as good as underwear, Duffy said. Duffy will tell you that bloodhounds are out of fashion. They fart and they drool, he said. They're susceptible to disease, they die young, and you can't let them off a lead under any circumstances. Everyone wants a shepherd, he says, but going old school has its advantages. Who's going to find you? It's not a shepherd. It's not a Mexican Chihuahua. It's not a pig. You know how they say a great white shark can smell a drop of blood underwater 5 miles away? That's a bloodhound. RC's trigger word to sniff for a living person as opposed to living remains is find. For search and rescue assignments, RC wears his orange harness with Duffy holding the lead. After 4 hours of searching, Duffy switched RC's harness to his black collar and told him, "We're gonna go gizmo," the dog's cue for cadaver mode. Smart dog. 4.5 miles up Forest Road 250 at Spectacle Lake, a murky pond, really, RC circled, tugged at vegetation on the bank, bit at the water, and jumped in and sat in the shallows. He wouldn't leave, Duffy said. Duffy wasn't convinced necessarily that a body was in the lake, and he explained that scent is drawn toward water and believed that there was a corpse somewhere nearby. Rain or critters could have deposited cadaver material in the lake enough to set off alarms in RC's snout. But at 4.5 miles from Joe's point last seen, the lake was at the far end of the ground game's probabilities. Duffy offered up a few more scenarios, some of which upset the Van Berkoms, such as when he told them that RC had picked up human remains scents under buildings on the ranch. But with few other sources of help, desperation had led to Duffy. At least he was trying, Joe's mom Zoe told me. He could have been right. I mean, I'm assuming they did some kind of searches, some ground-penetrating radar. I'm assuming they actually searched the ranch. Because if there was funny business at the ranch, I mean, that might be a little bit more probable than aliens. or an interdimensional tear in the space-time continuum through which he just vanished? Continued searches in August turned up nothing. Neil Keller was commuting back and forth between Tennessee and Conejos County, searching every moment he could. In October 2015, when he and the sheriff were no longer on speaking terms, he urged the county commissioners for more help, including a dive team to search Spectacle Lake. I, as the father of a missing boy, my only son actually, would like to have as much resources as could possibly be made available, he told the officials. Keller was feeling the stress. He lost 15 pounds from hiking and scrambling in the altitude. Just before Thanksgiving, he, David Van Berkom, and a small posse spent 2 days searching the snow-covered scree west of the ranch. It was the area that seemed most logical, but it's mean terrain. We went in there because that area was likely the least searched, he told me. No Joe. Keller would have to spend the long Colorado winter still not knowing. The canyon now belonged to the snowmobilers and coyotes. Next season's fly fishers and ranch guests wouldn't show up in any numbers until snow melted in spring. I first stepped through the missing persons portal back in '97 when researching updates on Amy Rowe Betchel, a runner who'd vanished in the Wind River Range of Wyoming, where I lived. My intrigue only grew. I tend toward insomnia and the analog, and each night in bed I listen with earbuds to Coast AM on a tiny radio. Big shout out to Coast AM. Kind of like the godfather of all of these paranormal podcasts and shows and all these things. The program, which explores all sorts of mysteries of the paranormal, airs from 1 to 5 a.m. in my time zone. It's syndicated on over 600 stations and boasts nearly 3 million listeners each week. Most of the time, the talk of space aliens and ghosts lulls me to sleep, but not when my favorite guest, David Paulides, is at the mic. Paulides, an ex-cop from San Jose, California, is the founder of North America Bigfoot Search. His obsession shifted from Sasquatch to missing persons when, he says, he was visited at his motel near an unnamed national park by 2 out-of-uniform rangers who claimed that something strange was going on with the number of people missing in America's national parks. He wouldn't tell me the place or even the year, for fear the Park Service will try to put the pieces together and ID them. So he's stating here that Paulides is afraid for the 2 rangers that basically whistle blew this to him. So in 2011, Paulides launched the Can-Am Missing Project, which catalogs cases of people who disappear or are found on wildlands across North America under what he calls mysterious circumstances. He has self-published 6 volumes in his popular Missing 411 series, most recently Missing 411 Hunters, Unexplained Disappearances. Paulides expects Missing 411 the movie, a documentary co-directed by his son Ben and featuring Survivor man Les Stroud, to be released this year. Last May, I met him at a pizza joint in downtown Golden. The gym-fit Paulides, who moved from California to Colorado in part for the skiing, is right out of central casting for a detective film. I don't put any theories in the books, I just connect facts, he told me. Under unique factors of disappearances, he lists such recurring characteristics as dogs unable to track scents. The time, late afternoon, is a popular window to vanish. That many victims are found with clothing and footwear removed. I mean, yeah, this is curious too, because if it's summertime or whatnot, late afternoon doesn't necessarily mean sunset at like 7, 8, 9. Late afternoon would be probably closer to 4 or 5-ish. But it's curious because isn't that normally the least likely time for most cases, because that's when the most amount of people are out hiking? And if it's an animal that ate you, well, a lot of these animals, their prime time is dawn and dusk. So he really does pull out the stops when he's kind of attempting to remove all cases that have more explained factors. Many victims are found with clothing and footwear removed, and sometimes redressed incorrectly, which is curious. And that many victims are found with... bodies are also discovered in previously searched areas with odd frequency, sometimes right along the trail. Okay, and I'm going to address this because there are a lot of people out there. I mean, in the Maura Murray case, even now in the Brandon Lawson case. Now, I don't know the details of exactly where his body was found, but in certain cases, they keep saying, "Oh, well, bodies are frequently found in areas where they were searched." Now, in the case of some of these missing 411 cases, if the body's right next to the trail, like literally feet from the trail, are these goofs seriously going to hallucinate that all these professional search and rescue people doing grid searches, multiple searches, that they missed a person right next to the trail that they disappeared from, clearly visible from the trail? See, some of these cases you can't, I mean, the mental gymnastics some of these coincidence theorists have to do in order to cling desperately to their realm of the must have a logical, reasonable explanation that they must know about. Obviously, a lot of these cases, it might not be paranormal, it might be an as of yet unproposed theory. But some of these people are just so mentally weak, they can't even consider the possibility that it's not, oh, well, the searchers must have just missed them. Children and remains are occasionally found improbable distances from the point last seen in improbable terrain. It's tempting to dismiss Paulides as a crypto kook, and some search and rescue professionals do, but his books are extensively researched. On a large map of North America on his office wall, Paulides has identified 59 clusters of people missing on federal wildlands in the US and southern Canada. To qualify as a cluster, there must be at least 4 cases, according to his pins, and you want to watch your step in Yosemite, Crater Lake, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, and Rocky Mountain National Parks. But then it would seem you want to watch your step everywhere in the wild. The map resembles a game of pin the tail on the donkey at an amphetamine-fueled birthday party. Paulides has spent hundreds of hours writing letters and Freedom of Information Act requests in an attempt to break through National Park Service red tape. He believes the Park Service, in particular, knows exactly how many people are missing, but won't release the information for fear that the sheer numbers and the ways in which people went missing would shock the public so badly that visitor numbers would go down. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are shocking. I mean, the flat earthers also posit that there can never be just a disclosure moment. It has to be a soft disclosure over a long period of time, just like the UFO disclosure movement. I mean, there are a lot of this is quite common. If they just announce tomorrow, by the way, thousands and thousands of people just disappear, I mean, that's kind of crazy. That would be crazy. There would definitely be a lot less people traveling to national parks. Paulides has brought along a missing persons activist named Heidi Streetman, an affiliate faculty member at Denver's Regis University who teaches research methods. After reading the Missing 411 series, she became frustrated that there was no searchable database for families of the disappeared. In 2014, she floated a petition titled "Make the Department of the Interior Accountable for Persons Missing in Our National Parks and Forests." It now has over 7,000 signers with a goal of 10,000. And this article is from a few years ago. As of right now, it's got 12,165 supporters, and they moved it to a $13,000 goal. But I mean, yeah, somebody has to be responsible. I mean, this is kind of crazy. Streetman, a spirited 56-year-old who spent her childhood camping all over Colorado, is beset with the case of Dale Stelling, a 51-year-old Texan who vanished on Mesa Verde's Petroglyph Point Trail on a 100-degree Sunday afternoon in June 2013. The trail is rated moderate, but it was hot, and Stelling didn't have water. Wow. At the petroglyphs, I mean, really? A 51-year-old Texan doesn't have water on a 100-plus degree day? I don't know. How are Texans with water? Do they just pull the tough guy act because they're used to just oppressive heat and they just don't need water? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that many Texans who would go on a hike without water. I mean, I don't know. At the petroglyphs where he was last seen, there is an intersection with an old access trail where his wife, Deneen, believes he may have left the main trail. If there was a way to get lost, Dale would find it, she says. But even if Stelling had taken the wrong overgrown path, he surely would have realized his mistake and backtracked. Maybe he collapsed in the heat, but rangers searched that area extensively on foot with dogs and in helicopters with firefighting crews. They sent climbers rappelling down cliffy areas and collected a whole trunk's worth of knapsacks, cameras, purses, wallets, water bottles, binoculars. None of them Stelling's. The park superintendent, Cliff Spencer, a 32-year-old Park Service veteran, still holds search and rescue training exercises in the area just in case they come across a clue. Wow, that's a really smart idea. The thing that gets me, he told me, is in all my years with the Park Service, I don't recall 5 cases like this. It's not likely that legislation would help the Stelling family, but an amendment to an existing law recently made it easier for volunteer search and rescue efforts to access federal wildlands with less red tape. The issue of permit approval is largely one of liability insurance, but the Good Samaritan Search and Recovery Act of 2013 expedited access for qualified volunteers to national parks and forests, and now they can search within 48 hours of filing the paperwork. And that's a critical 48 hours, though. I mean, some people could speculate, is this red tape intentional? More such laws would make things easier for experts like Michael Niger, 63, a retired Michigan State Police detective who now specializes in backcountry search and recovery. Niger lauds Streetman's database and wants to take it further. He'd like to see a searchable resource that gives volunteers like himself the same information that government officials have, including case profiles, topo maps, dog tracks, and weather. On February 4th, 2016, Keller went to Denver to attend a ceremony for the inaugural Colorado Missing Persons Day. With families of the missing gathered around them, legislators passed resolutions creating the annual event. Keller stood in the Capitol listening to his son's name as it was read aloud. It was one of 300. In late May 2016, I visited Conejos County. A month earlier, 2 Antonito men had been reported overdue from a camping trip from Duck Lake, less than 3 miles southwest of the Rainbow Trout Ranch, during a spring storm that dumped 2 feet of wet snow. Teams were called in from Mineral and Archuleta counties, along with the Wolf Creek Ski Area Ski Patrol, based 100 miles west on Highway 17. One of the men managed to struggle back to Horka. The ski patrol eventually found the frozen remains of the other. Wow. The search had also resumed for Joe. Earlier in May, more than 30 volunteers, including Keller, Collin, and 11 dogs from the nonprofit Colorado Forensic Canines, had spent about a week crisscrossing Conejos Canyon. The mission was to either find a needle in a haystack or to significantly reduce the probability that the youth was in a 2.9-mile radius of point last seen. The search was organized by the John Francis Foundation, a Minnesota nonprofit that since 2007 has helped more than 40 families with loved ones missing on public land. It was created by David Francis, a retired Naval Reserve captain, after his 24-year-old son, John, disappeared in Idaho's Custer County in 2006. John's body was found in a deep ravine the next year by paid members of the Sawtooth Mountain Guides. Custer County is the size of Connecticut, Francis says. The search and rescue budget was $5,000. If you go missing in a poor county, you're going to get a short, somewhat sloppy search. In my mind, that's the national disgrace. Everybody knows someone with cancer, but it's a minority who know someone gone missing. The May search for Joe turned up no sign, but bushwhacking off the Duck Lake Trail about 3.5 miles southwest of the ranch, Keller and Gwaltney came upon a sleeping bag, a cook pot, a tarp, and some bug spray, the gear of the lost campers. One sunny afternoon, I went looking for Sheriff Galvez and found him outside the Conejos County Jail on the north side of Antonito, directing inmates in orange jumpsuits as they planted flowers. He wore jeans and a gray canvas shirt with a pistol on his belt and reading glasses propped up his thick salt and pepper hair. It was clear that he'd rather orchestrate landscaping details than talk with the press, but who can blame him? The department has taken a beating on Facebook, Web Sleuths, Dateline, and the Chattanooga Times Free Press. It would be one of our only conversations. As this article went to press, Galvez didn't return repeated calls and emails from outside. You know, before I continue here, would that be a good idea to have inmates on search and rescue teams? I mean, obviously chained up to some degree, otherwise they'd run away. But possibly offering reduced sentences if any of them found clues, and maybe even be volunteers. So any of them that want to get some fresh air, they can be trained in search and rescue and be put to good use. Some of them might even welcome that. The ones that are either innocent, of course, or which could be a large percentage, or the ones that want to repent, or especially for some that have nonviolent offenses. I mean, that should count as time, to help with their time served, especially if it's nonviolent. It's been a rough year and a half, he told me. After the Keller search and the hunt for the Duck Lake campers, he said, I don't agree that I should be in charge of search and rescue on federal lands. I'm thinking of going to the state senators and saying I'd like to be backed out of that because I don't have a $90 million budget. The starting salary for his 5 deputies is $27,000. It'd be more effective, I think, he said, where a small department, a small community, I hear stuff like, I can't go, my equipment broke down. Frustration between Galvez and Keller had continued to roil. We had dogs, hikers, aircraft, the sheriff said, horseback, drones, scent dogs, cadaver dogs. We had so many resources it was unreal. When searchers took a break, he criticized all the resources. Cut everybody down. This is an ongoing investigation for a missing person, he continued. We have no evidence. He's just missing. It looks more likely than anything else. Over 18, you can run away all you want. If Joe was to call us, show me some proof he's okay, I'd close it up. Before I left Conejos County, I took a run up Forest Road 250. I parked at a turnout in front of a massive ponderosa pine with Joe's missing person poster stapled to it, then jogged down to the last point seen and tried to retrace his run. Based on the varying sniffer dog evidence, some figure that he ran up the road a ways, rounded the first or second bend, then got into trouble. I slowly shuffled upriver. A truck or SUV passed every 3 minutes or so. Locals told me that in July, the traffic on Forest Road 250 is even heavier. Wouldn't someone have recalled seeing Joe if he'd stayed on the road? After my run, I rinsed my face in Spectacle Lake. According to Duffy, RC could tell him I'd been here. So there was traffic on the road. That's curious. On Wednesday, July 6th, John Reenstra, 54, a search and rescue hobbyist, an endurance runner, and a former offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers, discovered Joe's body in a boulder field below the cliff bend. Wow. So here's the article of the discovery here. This is Denver Post, August 8th, 2016, by Jesse Paul. DNA confirms remains found in Conejos County are those of missing teen Joe Keller. Tennessee teen Joe Keller went missing while jogging in July 2015. Richard Martin, county coroner, said the confirmation was made Friday. He told the Denver Post that Keller died of a skull fracture after falling from a cliff and that his death has been ruled an accident. It is an accident, I'm sure of it, Martin said. There was nobody else with him. That's kind of weird for the coroner to say that. Like, what if his friend was lying and he pushed him? How would the coroner know? This is a weird thing for the coroner to say. He's sure of it? He wasn't there. How does he know? A Facebook page dedicated to finding Keller had been taken down, but a cached post on the page from Friday acknowledged the DNA link. Keller's father, Neil Keller, said Monday when reached by telephone that he was informed of the DNA confirmation last week. Now he's found, Neil Keller told the Post, adding that he thinks there should be conversations about improving search and rescue in Colorado and throughout the nation. Keller's remains were discovered in early July in Conejos County by a hiker near Forest Service Road 250 and approximately 4 miles west of Colorado 17. So there was a 30-mile search radius. It doesn't say how many miles from point last seen in this Denver Post article. Let's go back to the Outside article, see what it says here. I heard there had been a lot of searching for 2.5 miles, Reenstra said. I started looking for rapids, caves, cliffs, of course, and right at 2.5 miles, there is a place to pull off the road and there were cliffs close by. It took me an hour to get up there to the base of the cliff, and I went left until I ran out of room. Then I turned around and went back toward the ranch to the base of the cliffs and found him. The area was too rugged for horses or dog teams. When the Colorado Bureau of Investigations came to retrieve the remains, they packed horses in as far as they could and then had to reach Keller on foot. His body was 1.7 miles as the crow flies from the ranch. Searchers had been close. In November 2015, Keller and David Van Berkom had come within several hundred yards. Wow, this is crazy. So this is right up to the area where it was searched well. So if they had just gone a couple hundred yards further, they probably would have found him if he was there. I regret not searching there on the 25th of July, Keller told me. That's where I wish I'd started. What part of here would take a life? It's not the meadow on top, it's the cliff. Hindsight is always 20/20, Jane Van Berkom wrote me recently. But since there was a blanket of snow, I am not sure they would have found him even if they had chosen to go higher. But it is painful to think that they were that close. Every day, she said, she and her husband had searched for Joe as part of their ranch activities. I have sat on the cliffs many times since he went missing and scanned below over and over, and I never saw him, she said. That tortures me. You know, I would like to know the exact details here. Like, where exactly did she sit? And did she have a clear vantage point of where the body was finally found to the point where she could say he wasn't there? And all of the flyovers by drones and airplanes, I'm assuming these were all filmed. Can they identify the body there, or can they see the exact spot with no body there? I mean, these are the real questions here. The preliminary cause of death, according to David Francis, was blunt force trauma to the head. Jane told me he also suffered a broken ankle. It appears that Joe scrambled up and then fell. Perhaps the lost person behavior laid out by Professor Rescue Robert Coaster. Occam's razor wasn't as dull as it had seemed for almost a year. I mean, that depends, again, if his body really was there the whole time. Still, Joe's death remains a mystery to his mother. The events do not fit for a 1-hour run before dinner, Zoe says. After they had just driven 24 hours straight to get to Rainbow Trout Ranch, the boys hadn't slept in over a day. Joe had just split wood with his uncle David's 75-year-old father, Doug Van Berkom. She can't see her son running up to the canyon rim. She insists that he did not like heights and was not a climber. There is something we still do not know about what happened, is how I feel about it. So that's his mother, and again, mother's intuition, some people don't think it counts for anything, but if these are all facts, I mean, yeah, young people are kind of crazy, but again, up for over 24 hours, and he doesn't like heights. I mean, these variables are not looking good, and I would like to know if they reviewed the flyover footage, because if the body wasn't there, and then it was there later, what does that mean? It's hard to put your hunches and suspicions to rest. We'll never know for certain what happened to Joe Keller. We'll know even less about what happened to a lot of other people missing in the wild. One question I had early on was, are you better or worse off going missing in a national forest than from a Walmart parking lot? I thought I knew the answer. You can see an aerial view of my firewood pile from space on your smartphone. I thought that in the wild, someone would send in the National Guard, the Army Rangers, the A-Team, and that they wouldn't rest until they found you. Now, I'm not so sure. So this is just a great article really highlighting a lot of issues. Some people also believe, and this is one of the least talked about theories, that if there are some kind of spirits or tricksters or some kind of interdimensional beings, John Keel wrote about these as well, the posing as Men in Black or whoever. If these interdimensional entities or paranormal entities of some kind, if they just want to mess with people, if they did take somebody, kill them, or even return them alive, would they intentionally return them to a spot previously searched just to get a bigger laugh out of it? Like, look at those pathetic humans. Is that what they would do? Because, I mean, it's kind of hard to put yourself into the mindset of an interdimensional trickster spirit, but I don't know. I'm guessing they would do that. So that was our introductory episode in the Missing 411 series. Plenty more to come. In the next episode, we'll be looking at some older cases over the past couple hundred years, bizarre disappearances that just do not seem to have any kind of explanation whatsoever. Does that mean supernatural? Not necessarily, but they are very, very bizarre cases, and we will be going through the Missing 411 mystery in typical Mindshock fashion in a comprehensive and exhaustive examination with logic and reason at the forefront. If you do enjoy the podcast, find it interesting, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notification. You could also become a YouTube member and help support the channel that way. Get access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share this podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.